Welcome back to the New Stack Agents, our show about all things AI agents. And these days, agents means agents that run in your WhatsApp and Telegram and on your Mac Mini, and people buying Mac Minis just to run them. And so I thought one company, one project we should talk to is NanoClaw. And so with us today is Gabriel Cohen, the founder of NanoClaw. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Absolutely. I should add as a disclosure, we've known each other for a while. You and your brother, Laser, run a PR agency in Israel, and I've written a lot about the companies that Laser has represented. So you've been on some of those calls, so you're more prepped than most people for an interview like this.
Yeah.
Now, we've all seen what happened with OpenClaw. We've seen lots of these projects. So I was thinking, why start NanoClaw? What motivated you to get going with this project?
Yeah, for sure. So I, like many other people, used OpenClaw. So
you're getting confused yourself.
Yeah.
I was afraid that was going to happen to me.
Yeah. PicoClaw, IronClaw, OpenClaw. So yeah, I actually used it to make it even more confusing when it was Clawbot before it turned into Moltbot, and then OpenClaw. And so you mentioned our PR agency, but we've actually started a new business, which is an AI native marketing agency. Mm-hmm. And that means we're using AI for this new business for everything that we're doing, from operations, research, all throughout. And we've set up processes within the company. So for example, our sales pipeline and sales data on customers and deals and prospects, we don't have that in HubSpot. We have markdown files and folders. And when we're updating a deal file, it's talking with Claude Code and telling Claude Code, hey, here's a transcript of a call, here's an email thread, update things. And then I started to track deals like that. And then when I wanted an overview of what's going on with the sales pipeline, ask Claude Code for that, and that's synced in Obsidian Vault. All
you're the reason for the SaaSpocalypse. That's you.
I'm a believer in the SaaSpocalypse, and we can get into that. But yeah, so that was working great, but there was a missing piece, and it kind of came from two sides. It came from this side of how do I give an interface to people on the team who aren't working with Claude Code, who aren't on GitHub, who aren't super technical, to be able to access that same data through an agent, through Claude Code. And the other side was spinning up all these coding agents on my MacBook and having multiple agents running at the same time. And sometimes I wanted to run them in the background, and I started to experiment with the Ralph Wigum loops, where you won't get it running overnight. And
explain that, because that was popular with a certain group of developers, but most people may never have come across this idea.
Yeah, so the Ralph Wigum loop it's its own bit of lore and has its own community. So it's actually supported by Anthropic. They released a plugin for it, I think, or a skill. And what it is essentially is you run Claude Code in a loop. And what they did is they added a hook. So when Claude is trying to stop, it just prompts it to keep going. Every time you feed in the same prompt, which is basically you say, this is what we're trying to achieve. These are the criteria of success. Here are all the different things we need to accomplish. Write tests for it. These tests need to pass. And then every time it exits and gives control back to the user, it just gets prompted to do that again. A well-constructed Ralph Wigum loop will have the agent writing to files its progress and committing them also to GitHub. And then part of the process is it looks at what's been achieved so far, looks at the state of the project, looks at the recent commits, and based on that sees kind of where it's holding, and then is able to continue working on it. So you can get this really long-running processes. And there have been companies that have written blog posts about having agents running for weeks and porting massive projects to Rust, or building Linux compilers, or all kinds of things. Linux kernels, sorry. Or I think, I'm not sure if Anthropic, they put out a blog post recently about a compiler. I'm not sure if that was a Ralph Wigum loop or that was just...
Good point. Yeah.
But So running those things, you want to have it running in the background, and you don't want it to stop running when you close your MacBook and disconnect from the Wi-Fi. So I felt this need to have things going on in the background, and also for recurring jobs, like review the project documentation and update it. Documentation kept on getting stale,
Sure.
and I wanted to have those kinds of processes running. And so I had this idea before starting with OpenClaw that I'd like to have containers and agents that I can run in containers that are running on a machine that's always on in the background. And I SSH in and I set off some jobs to run, and I come back and I check on them, and then I'll have some scheduled jobs. And then I was thinking about what kind of UI I wanted to have, or interface I wanted to have, to be able to see all the different agents that are running and all the different jobs. And I had this kind of thing, as I'm in the shower day after day, it's kind of percolating this idea of what this system would look like. In the meantime, I started to see this buzz about Clawbot, and eventually I thought I'll give it a try. And I started to run it, and then immediately it clicked that this was what I needed for both giving my co-founder access to the sales data and the sales pipeline in a really easy to use interface. So we have a WhatsApp group with me and Laser, my co-founder, and we told the agent, which we call Andy. So Andy manages our sales pipeline, and he's our sales, I wouldn't even say sales assistant. He's like an executive assistant, or I would say he's the kind of chief of staff of sales. And Andy manages the sales pipeline every morning. So we told Andy on the first day in the WhatsApp group, send us an overview of the pipeline every morning. Here's what it should look like. So Andy sends us an overview every morning with all the different deals. He sends reminders for here's the tasks that Laser needs to do, and here's the tasks that Gabriel needs to do. And throughout the day, we send updates, and it could be these messy, long email threads. And Andy updates all the sales data. All right. So I connected Clawbot, got it running, and instantly it was like, this is what I needed, right? I can do all these things. I can have a WhatsApp group just with me where it's sitting on my GitHub repo, and it's running regular jobs, scheduled jobs on the GitHub repo. I can have a group that's on my client management that's reviewing the clients and flagging things that need to be done, R&D, product roadmap. I'm going to have all these agents. But then I went to sleep that night, and I didn't sleep well, because as soon as I set up Clawbot, I immediately saw a whole bunch of security issues. And it was a intuition, but also I was seeing actual things. I think a lot of people set it up, or even just hearing about how it worked, felt like this isn't safe, this isn't secure.
Explain that a little bit.
Yeah.
Why did you have that feeling that something was off there?
Yeah, people are not wrong, right? There are a lot of issues with Clawbot that go beyond the few CVEs and RCEs that were disclosed. So when I started to set up Clawbot, I was sitting next to my wife, and she was watching a TV show. I'm setting it up, and I'm like, look how I'm going to set this thing up, and it's going to be in my WhatsApp, and it's going to connect to the sales data. As I'm setting it up, I'm going through the process, and they ask you what tools you want to add and what packages you want to add, and as I'm going through it, I spot a package that I created months ago, right? So this is a little GitHub package that I created for editing PDFs with Nano Banana with Gemini model. It's something that I coded in 3-4 hours, pushed it to GitHub. It got a few hundred stars. I hadn't committed to it for months. It had so as a developer, every single dependency that I add to my software, I vet, right? And every developer should.
Sure.
We look, how many stars does it have? How much activity? How many GitHub issues? How many pull requests? Is it maintained? Who are the developers behind it? And seeing that they had added my package, which anybody who was vetting it should not have added it because it had no activity. Right away, I was like, so I was like, this is cool, but also this is worrying. And then as soon as I set it up and there were a few issues and bugs, and I asked the main agent to debug it, and it started to tell me what it was seeing in the messages. And then I very quickly saw that all of the WhatsApp messages were being stored in the database, in the local database, not just the groups that I had told it to listen to, but all of my groups. And they were all in that database. And I started to see all these things as I'm just interacting with this app, with a project.
Sure.
And then I started to look at the code base, and it was like 350,000 lines of code. I think now it's probably over 400,000 lines of code, and created in a matter of weeks, 350,000 lines of code. And it just, it breaks the fundamental thing that makes open source work and is supposed to make open source safe, which is the code is there and people look at the code and people find issues over time and people see you're relying, there are 100,000 people using this, there are 100,000 stars. That's a lot of eyeballs on this code base that are looking and finding issues. But when it's coded so quickly with so little oversight, and the main developer behind it is explicitly saying, I'm not looking at the code, that, and you know, nobody else is going to be able to audit 400,000 lines of code. And if you've got a team of the best security experts in the world and they spent 3-4 months auditing that thing and finding all the issues, by the time they finish the audit, there would be another 200,000-300,000 lines of code.
Right.
So and those aren't like, okay, logging or storing all the messages, that's a quick fix, right? And my unvetted, unaudited GitHub package that they added, that's a quick fix to remove. But underneath that, there's an architecture and an approach that is just fundamentally flawed in terms of the amount of code they're adding, how complicated the project is. And the fact that there's one of the biggest security flaws is that there's no isolation of the agents. These agents,
right? Because that's the big difference too with what you're doing, right? You're running all the agents. Every agent runs in its own container, if I remember it correctly, right? So.
Exactly. So that was the biggest thing. I said each agent is running. All the agents here are running on your machine, bare metal, and they're not isolated from one another. So if one is in your family WhatsApp group and one is in your work group, those two agents are running in the same environment. And there's some application level blocks that are trying to prevent them from accessing folders or files or logs, but that's not OS level isolation. So I sat down. So I kind of started running Clawbot, and then had all these other use cases that I wanted to add, but I wasn't comfortable running it and I wasn't sleeping well at night. So that weekend, Friday, I sat down and I said, I'm going to create not an open source project. I'm just going to create what I need to run this myself with minimal code. I'm just going to use good primitives, good design, good architecture, and I'll build what I need. And I figured it isn't that much. I don't really need 400,000 lines of code. I don't need 500 integrations, right? I just need 3 or 4, and I just need the code that I need. So that's what I set out, and that was the approach. That was the philosophy. I'm going to put just the code that I need, nothing else. So, and then one of the first things was each agent, it just seemed obvious, each agent should be in its own container, especially when you're running coding agents and you want to give them bash access, and you want to give them full bash access, and you want to give them full permission so they could do everything that a coding agent could do.
Right. But not to your whole machine, not to everything.
Yeah, not to my whole machine, and not interacting with the other agents that are running. So put each agent in its own container, and then you can give them full access in that container. You could selectively mount the directories, the files, the data that you want to give that agent access to, but nothing else. And then have some interaction, some way of messaging between the container and the host process. You route the messages to the right container, and you kind of solve that whole issue. I also chose to build it on the Claude Agent SDK, which is basically just Claude Code, because that's the coding agent that I'm using. And I felt like that was the best coding agent, at least at the time. Some people are saying Codex is taking the lead. You probably have
I may have said that, but I think that's. But to me, because I set up your project yesterday for myself, it's really simple. Just pull down the GitHub repo, basically start Claude, and it goes through the setup process in that directory, and your works pretty flawlessly. And when it doesn't, then Claude steps in and helps, and we can talk about whether that's a good thing or a bad thing sometimes. But it's so simple. But the fact that I could just log in basically with Claude Code with my Anthropic account made it really simple to get going, and I don't have to worry about the tokens. Now, some people I saw were worried that this might break Anthropic's terms of service. I don't know how. To me, it doesn't. I think, but anyway, talk to me how you think about that.
So there's some bad news on that front, because they just published, apparently, based on what I saw on X about an hour ago, they published clarification on their terms of service, and they're saying that Agent SDK is not supposed to be using OAuth. So
because that's how you log in.
So we'll see. But running it, getting it set up, at least, you're still using Claude Code, right? So so that was part of the philosophy. Let's keep it really simple, right? So I'm not going to build an installation wizard, a setup wizard. You'll just run Claude, and I'll give Claude instructions for how to set it up.
Yep.
And I'm not going to build a whole UI for looking at the logs and debugging, because anyways, I just want to have Claude debug it for me and look at the logs for me. And I said, if you want to change from Apple containers, which I built it with Apple containers because I was going to run it on a Mac Mini, and I've said if you want to use Docker instead of Apple containers, I'm not going to have that as a configuration. Instead, I'll create a skill file, so a markdown file that's in this that follows the skill standard that Anthropic created, that explains how to convert the project from Apple containers to Docker containers, right? And that is leveraging the abilities of coding agents, of Claude Code, but also you end up where every developer and every person who's running it is running the few thousand lines of code that they need, and not a single line of code that's there to support someone else.
Right.
And not a single feature. There isn't a branch in the code that's there for somebody else's machine. Every line of code that you're running is code that's there for you. And that's how I started this project and continue to build it out with that philosophy. And I've had some great people who have joined me. Tom Granote, who's a great developer, and he's taken a huge role in maintaining the project and working on going over the pull requests and things like that. And some other great people that have come on and joined. But that's the philosophy, which is that if a piece of software is adding all this functionality, right, integrations, and you see this a lot with enterprise software, they're adding every day new, their changelog has new features and new functionality, and it's functionality that you don't need, then that software has gotten worse for you. Right. So they've added capabilities and made it better, but actually it's degraded for you because now it's a larger package, it's less secure, worse supply chain security, and you don't need it. So I wanted to build software that is customized. Everybody runs the piece of code that they need. So started to run it, pushed it to GitHub and shared it, and it started to gain traction and gain attention. As I was building it though, and as people started to use it, you started to run into these issues where I think there are some new rules for software development that are starting to emerge. A lot of the old rules, the old standards and best practices for software development, I think a lot of them might not be relevant anymore. And there are some new standards, new rules that are starting to emerge and evolve, because the old rules come from a time and a place where it was very expensive to have someone refactor a piece of code or convert it to a different language or upgrade it to a new version. And today those things are very cheap, almost free. And technical debt in the past was something that just grew and grew and grew and compounded. And now you can crush your whole backlog of tech debt and by just running, some Ralph Wigum loops. And the models are only getting better. So if it takes you a certain amount of effort and time today to pay back your tech debt, if you wait 6 months, it's going to be cheaper to do it. And it's going to be faster and easier because there are better models and better coding agents. So the paradigm has shifted. I still see a lot of people online putting in lint rules. This was a mistake that I made when I started using Claude Code. And it's been almost a year now. I think it's just about a year since it was released, where I thought I'd be really smart, and I put a lint rule that said max size of a file is 120 lines, 120 lines of code. And then what was happening is, as Claude is starting to build features and code for me, it's constantly running lint, seeing that files are too big, and constantly refactoring them. And coding agents and LLMs are great at many things. Abstractions is not one of them, and good abstractions.
True.
So they're constantly pulling apart these files and all, kind of mutilating them, and you end up with this spaghetti code, essentially. And the models a year ago maybe could only handle a file that was 250 lines. Maybe they were kind of rewriting the whole file in every edit. Now they can do targeted edits, and they can handle files that are 500, 800, 1,000 lines. So that's an example of a rule that made sense before, maybe doesn't really hold right now. Dry, I think, is a lot less. So don't repeat yourself, right? You should never have repetition in your code. Reuse everything. That made a lot of sense back then. It was really expensive to write good code and test it and maintain it. Nowadays, reusing your code all throughout your code base actually creates side effects for every edit. When Claude Code is going and editing a piece of code, it isn't very good at doing that extra step and that extra process, looking at who else is using this and how does it affect that, and reasoning about all of that. It likes to just make the edit and move on. And if you have repetition and each piece of code is being used in one place and one place only, then you don't have to worry about what else it's going to break and how it's going to break it. And the overhead of maintaining duplicates doesn't cost that much anymore.
Good point.
You can run Claude Code on it or code any coding agent, and it will apply the same changes all throughout, and it can maintain consistency. You could have those daily or weekly jobs where it will maintain consistency for you across all of the different duplicates. So go ahead.
Let me, because this goes back to something you said earlier too, is a lot of this involves trusting the agent, right? Like, your code is small, but I do trust the agent to build the skills for me, to build the code around that, to build kind of custom skills, for example, for your project. So there's a lot of trust involved there with the agent to get it right. Like, how do you think about that aspect of it? Because there's, on the one hand, you're trusting the agent, on the one hand, maybe with another project, you're still trusting the agent, I guess, to get it right if the code isn't reviewed. But how do you think about that?
Yeah, there's no blind trust, and I don't think we should be blindly trusting coding agents. I don't agree with the idea of not looking at the code. At the same time, I don't think we need to be reviewing every line of code today, because if you work with coding agents over time and you start to see what they're good at and what they're not good at, you can start to develop an intuition for what are the things that need to be reviewed and where do you need to keep them on a really short leash and tell them exactly what to do. And you almost know, I feel sometimes that I almost know where there are going to be mistakes and where there are going to be bugs and errors. But then there are things that they just do and do well. And if they're coding a UI for you and it's only being used in one place and it isn't critical UI, right? And they code it and you go to that UI and you look at it and you test the functionality and it looks good. There might be some issues with the code where it isn't that clean, but it probably doesn't really matter. Because again, thinking about how the value of code is just dropping very, very quickly, right? Every 3 months or 6 months as new models come out and the price goes down and they get better, the value of that code goes down. So we're not writing code today that needs to stand the test of time for years in the future, because in a year from now, you'll be able to point a much better, much cheaper agent at that code and say, rewrite this and make it better.
Right.
So there isn't, so there are places where it is mission critical. If that's your business logic, if there are security implications to that piece of code, if a bug there would be catastrophic, then you definitely need to be looking at every line and making sure that everything is coded properly. But if it's the UI and there's tests and it's I guess there are places where you can trust it and there are places where you can't.
Right. And in this loop, you feel fine with trusting the agent for this.
So I would say the same applies for NanoClaw and how it was developed. I didn't trust the agent to get the architecture right or the security model right. And I didn't trust it for the design decisions. But there are places where I said, if this works, then that's fine, because I know that this isn't a place where there's a massive security bug lurking.
Right. Now, one thing I've been interested in is just, we've seen this almost explosion of, I don't know what to call it, this Claw ecosystem pretty much, right? With all of these kind of projects, yours, obviously. Why is that? What changed? Why are people so excited about this now? Because it feels like technically we could have done this before, right? Is it just the success of this one big project that got everybody excited and finally got this idea to the mainstream, or kind of what happened? Is it technical? Is it just people's understanding has changed? Was it the Ralph Wigum loop that from development that just got transferred over into the rest of this agent ecosystem?
Yeah, that's an interesting question to think about. I think we know now that Google had an LLM that was probably better than ChatGPT for months, maybe 6 months or a year before ChatGPT was released, right? And they just sat in and didn't release it because they were worried about bias and hallucinations and all kinds of other issues. And then OpenAI came with ChatGPT and they said, we're going to move quick and break things. And they put it out there. And there were all kinds of issues, but people got used to it. And some of them didn't matter. And some of them got fixed eventually. I think with Clawbot, OpenClaw, I think there was a bit of a similar thing where it was there and it could be done, but it isn't easy to do it safely. And even I think NanoClaw and what I've built there, I think that gives you an architecture where you can do it safely, but it's very easy for a user who's not security conscious to start making changes that break those the security model, right? So if you run it out of the box, I think it's good. But if you want to build a consumer product or even an enterprise product, but you want to build something that's a product that you sell and monetize, you have to not just deliver something that is safe when it rolls out the door, but something that anticipates how users are going to mess around with it and not understand it and make all kinds of mistakes and end up breaking it. And I think it took someone who's a bit of a visionary, but also a bit reckless, to say, you know what, I don't care about the security issues. I'm just going to throw all this stuff together and to take what we as developers have been working with and our reality for the past year and more so the past 6 months and 3 months and 2 months, which is crazy powerful coding agents. I think you've probably been doing the same, where you're not using Claude Code or Codex just for coding anymore, but it's just a general purpose agent.
That took people a while to get to that point, right? Because even for me, it was a switch where it's like, okay, I think it was when Cowork came out from Anthropic, it was like, okay, that makes sense. I'd actually never considered using Claude Code for anything else but coding, but obviously it can do that, right? So.
Yeah, it's funny, the Anthropic guys, the Claude Code guys at Anthropic who are on Twitter, on X have been saying for months, Claude Code is a general purpose agent, and they have kept saying that. And then they released the agent SDK, which it was trying to get that point across and brand it in a certain way. But they've been saying that it's a general purpose agent, and I think a lot of people have been using it that way. And then it took connecting it to messaging apps, which doesn't seem like that big of a deal, but when it's in your WhatsApp or in your Telegram or Signal, there's something that changes with how you think about it and how you interact with it. And rather than going for the Claude app or going for chatgpt.com, you go for NanoClaw and you talk with it in WhatsApp or Telegram. It's a much more powerful form factor than a chat conversation, which they're getting more agentic. They do search, but they don't do work for you, right? They don't.
Right.
You can't give them a job and they do that job, right? And I think connecting it with messaging, memory has always been there with the coding agents, right? They can write files, but creating a bit of a structure of a memory system. So the way NanoClaw works, first of all, it's built on top of the agent SDK, on top of Claude Code. Claude Code has built in memory into Claude Code. They rolled that out a couple weeks ago. So Claude now has, similar to ChatGPT on the web or Claude on the web, it saves these little memories from coding sessions about your preferences and about your projects, and then it has that in context. So using Claude for memory, the Claude Code for memory, and then also prompting it in the Claude.md file, which is loaded at the beginning of every session, giving it this context and saying, you have this persistent file system, write things there, store things there. Whenever you store something in the file system, keep an index of it in the Claude.md. And then giving some instructions saying when the files get too big, break them up into multiple files, add folders, evolve the system as needed, evolve this memory system. So not building this whole complex memory system, but just telling Claude, create a memory system and use it, and giving it the basic outline of it. So when you add memory, you add connecting it to your daily messaging apps, and you add to it scheduling jobs, recurring jobs, cron jobs, and just deferred jobs scheduling. That suddenly unlocks a whole bunch of use cases. And then having it being able to write code and run the code and write scripts, which is all stuff that's happening in Claude Code, but taking that form factor with the memory, with the scheduled jobs in your WhatsApp, where you can go to it for things that seem too trivial maybe to go to your terminal and go to Claude Code and ask it to do it for you, or maybe just not thinking about it in that way. That's really powerful.
Yeah, I agree. That really changes the way how you think about working with these agents. I've been using a commercial tool. It's called Tasklet. It's from the same folks who built the shortwave email client, and we're at Google doing Inbox, and they built this almost a similar idea, and it just, I don't know, it caught on, I think, with some folks, but maybe because it was commercial and not open source, it didn't quite get the same traction. Or maybe it has, I don't know. Maybe their user numbers are different from what I'm seeing. But we should talk to those folks at some point. But it's really the scheduling aspect of it was what got me using it. Do this at every morning and I'm sure a lot of NanoClaw users do the same thing. Every morning send me like a digest of what I need to do. I've got it connected to my Todoist where I can keep my tasks and my email, send me what's like super important, what are the latest AI companies in my inbox, who do I need to talk to. And that's so useful, I think, to just have that scheduling aspect of it, because talking to these bots is always exciting, but I don't want to write the same commands. Like they might be connected to the same MCP server, but not every morning I'm going to go at 7 a.m. in the morning and say, copy this same command in there, right? So I think that's a huge difference as well.
Yeah, so scheduling unlocks a whole bunch of use cases. And there are many things that used to be products that have now become prompts, right? A use case that it used to be a whole piece of software, a whole SaaS platform, even a whole company. Then now, if you have an agent with memory, a coding agent, right, that's able to do work with memory, with scheduling, with browser, internet access, search. You just prompt it and it can do it for you. So I created, with the NanoClaw instance that I'm running on my Mac Mini, I have it connected to WhatsApp and it has its own phone number. So I created a WhatsApp group with Andy and added my wife. And I said, hey, this is Andy, he's your assistant. And I left the group. And it took her a few days to use it. And then she started asking it for some recipes and how to change the recipes, which is the same kind of stuff that you ask, Claude on the web or ChatGPT. But then she started to, get into other things. What can you do, right? And it starts to list all the different capabilities that it has. And then she was looking at a pair of jeans that wasn't available in the size that she wanted on Levi's. And she said, could you tell me when this pair of jeans is back in stock?
Yeah.
And Andy said, yeah, I can do that. And she came to me and she's like, this is crazy. It's monitoring this pair of jeans. And I was like, is it really though? Is it just hallucinating that? Like, is it really going to tell you? So I said, ask it what it's doing, how it's going to tell you that. And she asked it and it says, well, I've set a job for 9 a.m. every morning to go to the Levi's site and check on this pair of jeans. And I'm going to ping you when it's available. And that's a product, right? That's something that would have been a SaaS product and people might have paid $5 a month or $10 a month for that. And now it's just a prompt. And then if it gets it wrong because it's the wrong color, right? You don't need to go back to the code base and start adding features and functionality and filters. You don't need to even go to your agent framework and start changing the logic of your agent and adding steps and layers. You just write to it, hey, you sent me the wrong color. Make sure next time it's the right color. You give it feedback and it adapts and evolves the way a person would, an assistant, an employee, or someone who's doing a job for you.
Yeah. And I think it's the flexibility of these agents. Like last night, my wife was traveling, her plane was down for maintenance, so I didn't want to keep checking the United app. So I went to NanoClaw and I was like, I just see what it can do. And it's like, check this flight every 10 minutes, give me an update on, has the departure time changed? And it was like, well, I can't really do that direct. I could go to the website and keep looking, but if you use this, get me an API code key from this service. I forget what the service was, Air something. I was like, okay, that makes sense. And it looked legit. So I gave it the API key, it was free. So I was like, and it kept checking every 10 minutes and gave me updates for the time I needed it. And that's not something you programmed into it. That's just something the agent can do, right? So it's the flexibility too that makes such a huge difference. So
it's funny. There's that point where you're having it do things for you. And then there's that point where it's having you do things for it. Go get me this API key. And I think we're going to be seeing more and more of that, where it's doing the work and then it's pulling you in to help it out on things that it can't do.
It's the human becomes the kind of the task, the task rabbit. The Fiverr employee for the model, for the agent.
Yeah, I do a lot of brainstorming and ideating with Claude, and I find that Opus, and the new one especially 4.6, is really good for that. And I was chatting with it about something with platform payments, adding payments to a platform where users can get payments, and asking it about capabilities and Stripe Connect and whatnot, and it was saying, well, yeah, it'd be really difficult to have an agent be able to connect the user to Stripe Connect because it's easy for it to do some of the setup and webhooks and whatnot, but once it gets to document verification and verifying yourself with Stripe, that's it's going to become really complicated to get an agent to work with a user to. And then I was like, well, yeah, but the agent could just send the user to Stripe to do that, give it a link, say, go to Stripe, do this, come back. And once you start to add that piece in it where the agent doesn't have to do everything, but it can guide the user through the steps. And with setting up NanoClaw, so the way you set it up, right, you run Claude, and there's a skill /setup, you call that skill, and it starts Claude starts to go through the setup process. And then as it's going through the setup process, it has you jump in when you need to scan a QR code to connect to WhatsApp, or you need a bot token or secret or whatever it's called from Telegram.
Yep.
And then it also asks you questions. Do you want to have the agent respond every time there's a message, or should it only respond when you add it? You go at Andy. How do you want, if you're adding, and then there are skills for adding other features. So when you want to have not just WhatsApp, but you want to add Telegram, so you do /add Telegram. And there's a skill there which explains to Claude how to add Telegram. And then it will ask you questions. It interviews you. Use the ask user question tool, which Anthropic has, which is great UX. And it asks you, do you want to use this instead of WhatsApp or alongside WhatsApp? Which one do you want to be your main kind of admin control channel? And then it builds it based on what you want. So that's that customization, but keeping it simple, not adding those abilities to the code, not having config files and a plugin system, but leveraging the capabilities of AI tools to build customized software.
Yeah, for sure. And /customize is the command to build whatever you want to as well. So that's kind of super useful for sure.
Yeah, /customize is freestyle. And then you have /debug, which has instructions. And you don't need any of these commands because as a developer, as someone who's familiar with Claude Code and familiar with using coding agents, that's what you do already. You just ask it to customize things for you.
Right.
But these smooth it out and save tokens and save time and save some of the back and forth. And we're actually working on a really big refactor where currently, and talking again about these new best practices in coding that are evolving. I think one of the new ones that a lot of people are probably running into is as you have these skill files and other kinds of markdown files that become important parts of your code base and important artifacts of your code base, what tends to happen is code snippets, code blocks, scripts end up sneaking their way into the markdown files. So you'll have a set of instructions in plain, in natural language, and then suddenly there's a code block in there with this bunch of code, and it's telling Claude run all this code. And then that's really inefficient because Claude ends up reading the code and then writing that code back out to its bash tool, and then running it, and then getting all the output. And then a lot of times in that reading and writing process, it will make some mistakes, especially as a context window starts to fill up and starts to get context rot. So I think one of these new principles is you shouldn't have any code in your markdown files, and you need to be careful. And maybe we can create lint rules for that, where markdown files should reference code files, and that's part of the skill standard that Anthropic created. As part of the skill, you can have scripts and you can have code files, and the markdown files should reference them, but they shouldn't contain the code within it. So that's a process that we've already done of refactoring the setup skill, so that the setup skill now, it was a 600-700 line markdown file with tons of code all throughout. And it worked because Claude was able to work around the rough edges, but we've now refactored it. It's about 120 lines, and soon it's going to be about 60 lines of markdown. And there's now 10 or 12 scripts that Claude runs, and at each step it runs a script, and it doesn't get the full output of npm install, let's say, where it's 500 lines of output that end up polluting the context window. Instead, all the output goes to a log file, and when that script finishes, it just outputs 3 or 4 lines saying success, failure, this is the environment we're on, these things have been configured, these things haven't been. So just pure clean context for Claude.
Interesting.
And when Claude needs to, it goes and looks at the log file to see the full error, to see the full run.
Right. If it needs it, then if it's successful, it doesn't need it. So.
Yeah, if it's successful, it moves on to the next step. And with that, we've gone from the setup skill. I mean, the big motivator, I knew that I needed to do this, but the big motivator was my brother is setting up NanoClaw. He has a construction business, and many people probably don't know this who don't work in construction, but apparently construction, the entire industry runs on WhatsApp, and everybody's businesses are just managed on WhatsApp. And
different brother from the brother who's your co-founder for the
yeah, I have lots of
marketing
brothers.
agency, we should say.
Yeah, I have lots of brothers. People should know that. So he's in the middle of setting it up, and he said he was setting it up and it worked great. But by the time he finished setting it up, he had run out of his quota and for the 5-hour window on his pro plan. And I was like, okay, I gotta fix this. So we've gone from probably anywhere between 30, 50, sometimes 100,000 tokens to get through the setup process down to 3,000 tokens. And with another refactor, that's going to go even further.
And then tokens, especially if you can't use the pro plan at some point anymore and you actually have to use an API key.
Yeah, well, you can use the pro plan, the plan still for the setup process because you're running Claude Code to do that. But apparently you're no longer able to do it for running the agent that's in your WhatsApp. But yeah, I think tokens. So I've actually added an interesting little GitHub action to the NanoClaw repo, which every time a change is merged to the source code, it uses tick token, which is a OpenAI package that can tell you how many tokens something is. So it gives you kind of tokens. It runs it on the source code and counts how many tokens it is. And there's a little badge in the README that has the token count of the project. And the NanoClaw project, to have Claude or Codex or OpenCode pull the whole project's code, source code, into its context window, it's 35,000 tokens. And Claude Code, for example, has a 200,000 token context window. So the whole project is only 17% of the context window. So you can have your Claude.md and a lot of other contexts and then pull in the whole project context, and you still have 50% of your context window to work with, which means that when you're trying to add a feature to NanoClaw, Claude can one-shot pretty much any feature within one context window. And if you're trying to add a feature to OpenClaw, it's a 400,000 line code base. So it's many context windows, even for Gemini.
For sure. Awesome. Well, we're in a world now where tokens are the main currency, it feels, for everything we're doing. But the other currency we have is still time, and I think we're running out of time. We were way over the time we had allotted for this. So I really appreciate you coming here. Maybe the last question for you: where do you think this project is going to go within the next, I don't know, it's hard to say even a year in this world, but next 3 months? Like, where would you like the project to be?
Yeah, so we're taking this approach, the philosophy of minimal code base and additions to the code base, whether it's integrations, new features, being added at build time. We're taking that to the extreme. So right now there's about 3,000 lines of code and WhatsApp is baked in. We're going to actually remove WhatsApp from the core code, and the default version is going to run headless. We're going to remove the file mounting. A lot of people don't need that. They're not mounting extra directories. That's about 400 lines of code. So we're going to strip out anything that isn't really core and have this really minimal core code base. And then when you have a really minimal core code base, it's extremely easy to add new integrations and new features on. So it's going to be extremely easy to build out hundreds of integrations and features and capabilities. And I think we'll be able to reach feature parity with OpenClaw and overtake all the other claws. There's a lot of claws out there very quickly. And I think this is also a very appealing form factor for enterprises, because they can audit the code base. They can apply whatever 3 or 4 skills they need to add on the channels they need and the capabilities they need, and are left with still a 2,000-3,000 line code base with just a few dependencies. They'll be able to audit that. The security team could get together in an afternoon and put it on a whiteboard and understand exactly how it works and verify that it's safe and secure. So we're going to take that and continue building on it. And there's a lot of things that need to be done there in terms of handling merge conflicts and resolving merge conflicts and pulling in updates from over time when
Yeah.
every user is customizing their code base, and then you have to pull in changes from remote. So building out a whole system around that, I feel really good about this becoming infrastructure that enterprises are building on and that individual users are building on. And I think companies can be built on top of, and I hope companies will be built on top of NanoClaw. So this infrastructure for spinning up agents in containers with good isolation, with a good security model, handling the message routing, the scheduling of jobs, handling a lot of the plumbing, but really flexible, simple infrastructure that anybody could build on. And I hope many people will build on it.
No plans for you to build a company on top of it yet?
The question, the difficult question is which company, because there's just so many options. And
hosted NanoClaw would be the default way for, an open source project.
Yeah, but then, I mean, so I have a friend, so Tom Granot, who's really doing a tremendous job helping me maintain and really taking the lead on maintaining the project. He's spun up 3 different products in 3 days on top of NanoClaw. And it just seems like every day he's got a new product that he's launching, and so it's tough to know which one, but I think I'm definitely going to be looking at some of those platform directions, whether it's enterprise or consumer.
Sure, makes sense. Well, when that happens, let us know. We'll talk about it again, see where all of that goes.
For sure. I'd love to come back.
For sure. Gabriel, thank you so much for being on.
Thank you, Frederick.